Hello and welcome to Faithfully Stampin' with Jennifer Helm. I am Jennifer Helm, the Faithful Stamper, an independent demonstrator with Stampin' Up. Today's technique is what I'm calling a Peekaboo window punch card. It's very quick and simple, but it kind of gives an element of fun to your card. So what I did was I took a punch from my collection and just created a window in the front of my card so I can feature a peek through to the image inside my card. Like I said, not real complicated, but fun. A couple little tips and tricks for this card, so I hope you'll stay tuned and check out the samples at the end of the video. So you do not need a lot of special supplies for this card. Very quick, very simple. So we will go ahead and get started. The first thing you are going to need is a piece of cardstock for your card base. Now, you can use whichever style of card base suits your needs. For example, I am using what some people refer to as the hamburger style card base. This is more solid, or you can also use the hot dog style card base, which is the 4 1/4 by 11, so that's the long skinny. I know that sounds silly, but that's actually how they teach the kids to identify the paper folds these days. So sometimes it can work for us too. So this is 5 1/2 by 8 1/2. I'm just gonna fold it in half. And I'll talk a little bit more about why you might want the other card base in a little bit. This is a panel of designer series paper. This is 5 1/4 by 4, and I'm just going to glue this to the front of my card. One thing I'm going to do, I do have a habit of putting a lot of adhesive on the fronts of my cards, but what I'm going to do is take an extra run down the middle of my card, because with taking the window out, I want to make sure I don't have too much give in the paper. I haven't really had a problem with that, but I like to make sure it's not going to pull off away from the front of the card. All right, so the next thing I'm going to do is create the window in the front of my card. I'm going to use the deckled circle punch that we have. You can use any punch shape that suits your needs. Now, I recommend starting maybe their first time with a shape like this, a circle or something similar. Not all punches are going to work. You kind of need to look at them and see what direction, if you put your paper in, is your stamp or is your punch going to punch in the right direction? I had some punches in my collection that would have made adorable cards, but they would have punched upside down, and that just wasn't going to work for the card technique. So you also can't use builder stamps. For example, our Scotty Dog punch, which you'll see in some of the samples later. It's the Scotty Dog, but the bow punches above the Scotty Dog, and that wouldn't look right on a card. So you do have to kind of look at your punch collection and see what might work. And you might also have trouble depending on how far your paper goes into your punch. And that is where the other style of card base came into play. I created this one first, and then I happened to grab another piece of cardstock for one of my samples that was the long skinny card base, and I actually had a little more play with the punch I was using as far as positioning it on the page where I wanted it. So just keep that in mind as you're starting to put your card together. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take my deckled circle punch and slide it here onto the front. And you do have to give this a little more oomph because you're not just cutting through the cardstock, you've added that layer of designer series paper. So I kind of have to give it a little extra oomph. So pardon the noise and the mini earthquake. And then I'm gonna take this piece and put it to the side. We'll talk about that more later. My next step is I'm gonna go ahead and fold my card shut. And I'm gonna grab a panel of 5 1/4 by 4. This is gonna be the inside of my card. Now, normally I would do all my stamping and then glue it in just in case I messed up. But I don't want this to be shifting around because I want my image to be stamped in exactly the center of my window. So what I'm gonna do is grab my adhesive, and instead of going to town like I normally do, I'm just gonna put a little bit of adhesive on the top corners. I'm kind of gonna just tack this down. And it is gonna stay put because this adhesive is a pretty strong one. It's our Stampin' Seal Plus, that's my favorite. But this is gonna hold my panel in place, but if for some reason I screw it up, I should be able to pull this off without too much trouble, and then I can keep going, as opposed to having to restart if I glue the whole thing down. So hopefully you'll see what I mean as I move forward. Now the stamps that I am using today, this is called A Little Cheesy. This is a fun stamp set. It's got some great images and some little kind of punny sentiments that go along with each of the images. So I'm gonna take the cookie stamp and some black Memento ink because I wanna color my cookie. And so Memento is what you use with Stampin' Blends. Now this is a red rubber cling stamp, so I don't need any extra cushion. I just wanna make sure I have enough ink on my card, or on my stamp, and I do. That way I get a nice impression on my card. And I'm gonna stamp this right in the center of my window. Give it a little press, I kind of press 1, 2, 3, and then lift straight up. And that came out okay, so that's good. Now, what I wanna do also, before I go any further, before I color my image in, I wanna add a sentiment to the inside. And here's why I do this before I get my image all colored nicely. You have to be careful where you put your image, any sentiments on the inside of your card, because, for example, I have some space here around this. And if you're not careful, like if I wanted to stamp my image here, it would actually be seen through the Peekaboo window. I made one of these earlier and I just barely squeaked it by. So I really kind of have to hedge really up towards the top. Normally, I haven't actually even taken the time to do this, so this is actually a good tip for you, is take the time maybe with your card closed to see where you might want to put your sentiment. I could put it down towards the bottom as well. I wouldn't go too far down to the bottom because I want to have space to write, but I think I'm going to try to squeeze this in the top and hope for the best. I'll share with you a little tip later when I talk about the samples, because I did actually goof one up and have the wording show through the front of the card, but I fixed it. All right, so this there we go. Maybe a little close to the top, but for the sake of this card and not showing through the window, we're gonna roll with it. Yep, there we go. So depending on if you've got a narrow stamp, I could have perfectly easily stamped it right here, but with a longer one, I had to really be careful there. Okay, now I can breathe a little bit better. So I'm really gonna quickly color in my cookie. Of course, it's gotta be a chocolate chip cookie, right? Everybody loves chocolate chip cookies. And so I'm just using some of our stamping blends. There are alcohol markers. And I'm using one of our neutral set for the chocolate chips. It almost looks like an early espresso color, so it's perfect. And then I have light crumb cake, and I'm gonna use the brush end. Normally I would probably take a little more time and go around the inside with the fine tip, but you don't wanna be here all day watching me color my cookie. So I'm just gonna use the brush tip and move a little bit faster. I also have lots of nice open surface here I can color with that brush tip. So once this is done, we are just going to finish off the front of the card. So obviously, depending on the stamp you use, you might not have any coloring to do. You might just have a sentiment stamp that you're using, some kind of greeting that would fill in your window, but there is my little cookie. So to finish off the card front, I decided I wanted a sentiment to pair with the You're One Tough cookie, and I thought Get Well might be the way to go. So I have a strip of cardstock that is 3/4 of an inch tall by 4 inches wide, and one that is 1/2 inch wide by 4. This is what I'm gonna stamp my sentiment on for the front of the card. Now, the sentiment for the front of the card is a clear photopolymer stamp. It is from the Cheerful Basket stamp set that we have. And since it's photopolymer, I do need that extra little cushion. Stamping is the same technique, just tap, 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 make sure you get enough ink. And then a little quick pressure, 1, 2, 3, and There we go. Quick and easy. And obviously you can decorate the front of your card however you like, whatever suits your design. So this panel gets some adhesive to layer together. Oop, I'm going a little crazy with my adhesive. Whoop. And I don't want to stick into my card or my workshop table here. So these, I got glue everywhere. I'm just going to layer together. And I could glue these on flat, but I'm going to use some dimensionals to give the front a little bit of height, not too much. And let's see here. I have a little overhang on the edge, so I'm just going to grab my scissors. Pardon me. And just trim that little excess piece off. There we go. Otherwise, the perfectionist in me is going to fuss a little bit. All right, so dimensional backings come off. And I'm just going to put this here on the card. And I could just roll with it this way, but I want to add a little embellishment, and I happen to have the perfect thing. We have our solid faceted gems, and it has this beautiful dark blue color, our starry sky, which is perfect to go with this card. And my Take Your Pick tool is the perfect tool to apply these. I used to use my fingernails, and then I would get the embellishments stuck to my fingernails and shoot them across the room. So now I tend to use my Take Your Pick tool because it saves my fingernails and usually my patience. Not always, but sometimes. All right, so there is our quick and simple Peekaboo window punch card. Now, one thing I like to share is if I have other ideas to kind of give you a springboard. So there are some options for you. I'm going to run through some samples to show you some different ideas of ways you can decorate your card, and then kind of a secondary card idea. So I decided, since I liked the images and the puns so much in the stamp set, I decided to use each of the images on a card. So first up, we have the wine card. This one, I wasn't sure how, I kind of played around with the design. Pardon me, and I decided to stamp the wine glass image just as I did with the cookie, but I added a second wine glass. I just stamped it on a piece of Whisper White, not Whisper White, Basic White, and then I fussy cut it and glued it to the front of the card. I just had to be careful where I put my dimensionals so that I didn't accidentally glue the card shut. So there's another quick, simple idea. And you don't have to have a sentiment on the front of the card if it doesn't suit your card needs. Now, here's the one I was talking about earlier. This is our pudding card. Thanks for putting up with me. Now, when I stamped this, I wasn't really thinking, and I got a little too close to my image, and with the deckled circle having the bump out on the sides, that little T was showing. And I had colored everything. I was so happy with this, and then I closed it, and then that T was hanging out there, and I thought, ugh, what am I going to do? I don't want to throw away the whole card. So I was planning to use this piece here down at the bottom, but I decided to cover up my mistake. So I just put the layers together and then glued it straight across and trimmed it. And then I continued it on the other side so it didn't look odd. And I think it works. Might not have been the best plan, but it worked for me. And it covered that mistake. And then last but not least, the last stamped image from that set is the cheese. It might sound cheesy, but I think you're great. And so here I just used the cheese stamp for the inside of the card. And for the front, I put my sentiment here on the wider strip, and I stamped tone on tone with the crushed curry to kind of give that cheese look a little bit more of a presence on the card. So just quick and simple and fun. Now, you are not tied into that deckled circle or even a plain circle. You can use any punch that fits your needs and works well on the card. One punch that I had was our vintage bottle. So here is a card using that. So I stamped the bottle. That is what appears inside the card. And then I stamped the flowers on the front of the card and added my sentiment on a scalloped oval. Now, you might have to get a little creative with your writing, and so you might want to think about that when you make the card. For example, this next one I actually made first, And I thought, oh, I'll put the bottle right in the middle of the card. Well, when I opened it up, I realized, you know, that kind of messed up my writing space, but you know what? I can make it work. So this is also a tighter shape since it's an object, the bottle, and I didn't have to worry about where to put my sentiment on the inside of the card. I just had the shape there. So just another idea and another thought for you to be mindful where you put your punch shape. Now you can also embellish if you're using something like the deckled circle or a straight circle. And here I added 2 of our Scotty Dog punch. Like I said before, the Scotty Dog would have been really cute, but his bow would have been floating up here above him, so that really wouldn't have made any sense. So here I just added it to the front, being careful where I put my dimensionals, and came up with a cute card. I really like this little shadow look here. Now, if you're thinking, well, I don't think I have any punches that work, it's okay. If you have a die cut machine and dies, you can use them on your card as well. I actually had a punch that malfunctioned and it didn't cut out the circle that I wanted it to, but I really hated to throw away the whole card. So I grabbed my dies, and I had a die that was just bigger than the punch I was using, so I used the die cut instead. And dies actually give you a little more freedom as far as shape and space to like where you want to put it on your card. So that's another option for you as well. But here again, I use the Scotty Dogs to create a cute little card. And this next card isn't my favorite, but it's growing on me. I wanted to try the rectangle postage punch. And so I punched in each direction coming in from the side of the card. And so I created these 2 little windows. And when I first did that, I thought, oh, I don't know, what can I do with that? And I still was playing with the Scotty Dogs at the time. So I put 2 of the Scotty Dogs on the front. And then I didn't like how it looked on the inside, so I punched 2 more and just attached them with dimensionals. So I sort of made a Scotty Dog sandwich, and it created a nice look on the inside and on the outside of the card. So just lots of different options for you. Now, if you're thinking you might like this card style, but you really wish you had more room to write, I have a solution for that too. So here I have this label shape that I used, and I added the punch from the front to the inside. Now, rather than have my sentiment here and then have to squeeze my message in here, what I did was I added more, instead of a single panel, it's more of a card within a card. And so I took a piece of cardstock that was 4 inches by 10.5 inches. I scored it at 5 1/4 so that when it was folded, it was the same size as a regular panel inside the card, but I can open it up and have more room to write. And I could have attached this so that the fold opened in either direction, but this was the way I chose to do it. So, and another thing, if you're just using a sentiment stamp with words on it, as I did here, the first time I stamped it, I actually stamped it crooked, and I thought, well, okay. I'd already glued this down, and I took a second piece of basic white and stamped again, and I just laid it down within the frame and glued it, and that way I didn't waste the card, and I still had an option to finish the card off. One thing I forgot to mention, and this was what I sort of messed up on each card. This is the card I created at the very beginning, and here's what I forgot. So make a note so that you don't do what I do. Remember how I tacked the top so that this piece wouldn't move around? I forgot to come back and tack the bottom. I did this with almost every sample I made, so it just happened to pop into my memory. So I'm just going to grab my adhesive, add a little bit there. It's easier if you open the card all the way, like I did there. And now my card is ready to be sent. So just a word to the wise, make sure you catch that on the cards. So, all right, now back to the samples. Sorry about that. It just hopped into my mind and I wanted to tell you before I forgot. Now here is another card. I think this one was my favorite because it came out really, really cute. In fact, I actually made 2. I played with the positioning of the stamp. This one I came in from the side and this one I came in from the top. But if I open the card, you might notice this stamp is a lot bigger. It's not like that cookie that just fills up the space, right? So I want to show you how you are able to use a bigger stamp but still get it positioned where you want. if you have one of our Stamparatus stamp positioners or any other stamp positioner, this is the perfect tool to do that. So what I did was I took my Stamparatus and I created the window in the front of the card. Then I took my card base and I put it in the Stamparatus like this. Of course, it didn't have the decorations on it at the time. And I laid my stamp where I knew it would fit in that circle. Then I closed my platform so my stamp was attached. Then I flipped the card over. I had my white panel here, and then I inked up the stamp and stamped it, and then the stamp was perfectly positioned so that when I closed it, that koala was peeking through the window. So if you've got a stamp positioner at home, that's a great way to help you get a larger image on your page, and I happen to be really tickled with how those cards came out. All right, now one more idea I want to share, and I alluded to this at the beginning. So here's the card we originally made, and if you're making several of them like I was, I had several of these shapes left over, and I hate to throw anything away, especially when it's a functional shape like this that I could use on another card. So I got to thinking, what could I do? So if you've got a minute to think, you might be able to get your creative brain to come up with a secondary idea, and so this card was born. So I just took those two leftover punches, flipped one of them over so that, because it's actually the piece that I cut out of the card front, I stamped my sentiment here, added it to the card after I stamped the cookies all over, and then I just used my Get Well sentiment on the inside of the card. So just a kind of little simple way to create a second card using the piece left over from the front. It might not work with every card, but something to think about. And I have one other idea here to show you. I took those bottles that I used from the coral colored cards I showed you earlier and some of the same paper and just created another card here. So just something a little bit fun. So I hope you enjoyed learning how to make the Peekaboo window punch card and get an idea for a second idea that can stem from one to the other. I hope you have fun if you try this technique at home as well. If you haven't already, I would love for you to subscribe to this YouTube channel. You can click the notification bell and be notified each time I post a video here on the page. And if you're a fan of Facebook, you can hop over there and find me at The Faithful Stamper. You can check out my website, and I share photos of projects, specials that Stampin' Up! Has going on, and other things there if you're inclined to check that out. Thank you so much for watching. Take care and happy crafting.